Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, January 15th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Netanyahu tells the U.S. this is also your war. So on Saturday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he told Secretary of State Antony Blinken that the brutal campaign in Gaza that has killed nearly 24,000 Palestinians is not only an Israeli war, but also an American one. Netanyahu said, quote, "This is not just our war, it is also your war. This is the war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness," end quote. So you talk about the rhetoric that you see from Israeli officials, the sons of light against the sons of darkness. And Netanyahu said, he told Blinken this when Blinken visited Israel last week. Netanyahu also said, quote, "This is a war against the axis of evil led by Iran and its three proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis," end quote. So from the perspective of the Palestinians and many Arabs across the region, the slaughter in Gaza certainly is an American war. All you have to do is look at all of the support that the U.S. has given Israel to do this, all the military aid, the political cover, vetoing the resolutions at the UN Security Council, coming out against the genocide hearing at the ICJ, all this stuff that they see that. And this is part of the reason why I'm so opposed to the U.S. being involved in this and other wars and other conflicts as well, is because, they're making enemies of people, that they view this as an American war. And the U.S. has now also intervened directly on behalf of Israel to bomb the Houthis in Yemen, who started attacking Israeli-linked commercial shipping in protest of what's happening in Gaza. And now the U.S. has escalated that situation by bombing Yemen. The militias in Iraq and Syria have been attacking the U.S. It's kind of for two reasons. One, they want the U.S. to get out, so they're probably taking advantage of the regional tensions. But also, they did start those attacks in response to U.S. support for what's happening in Gaza. And during that 7-day truce, when they were exchanging hostages, the attacks stopped. I believe there was just one rocket fired at a U.S. base in that time. But then they started again when Israel restarted everything. So we've seen the Biden administration express concerns about some of Israel's tactics in Gaza, but they're not considering cutting off Israel or even leveraging military aid. And some U.S. officials fear that this unconditional support is going to embolden Netanyahu to provoke a major war in Lebanon, more so than he has already. So in his comments on Saturday, Netanyahu also took aim at South Africa's genocide case at the International Court of Justice. He said, quote, "No one will stop us, not The Hague, not the axis of evil, not anyone else," end quote. So Netanyahu's comments came a day after Israel presented its defense of South Africa's charge at the ICJ. So the first day of the hearing was on Thursday. That's when South Africa made its case. And then Israel defended itself on Friday. And from what I saw, I didn't watch the whole thing. I read a few reports on it. I linked to one here from Jeremy Scahill at The Intercept. And it's titled, "At The Hague, Israel Mounted a Defense Based in an Alternate Reality." And it was a lot of, talking about the October 7th attack, Hamas, but what about Hamas was basically their big argument. And they also tried to raise some kind of procedural issues, accusing South Africa of not following the proper procedure to bring them to the ICJ by invoking the way that they did it, invoking the Genocide Convention. Based on Scahill's interpretation of everything, he doesn't think there's really anything there. They're basically saying that South Africa did not communicate enough to Israel that they were going to do this. But then there is record of communication. So now the decision on genocide, whether or not Israel's committing a genocide, is going to take a while. Could take a few years. But the first thing, South Africa wants the ICJ basically to order a halt to the military operations. And that decision, it's not exactly clear when that's going to happen. It seems like it could take a few weeks, but relatively soon. But Netanyahu has vowed no matter what, the onslaught in Gaza will continue. He said, quote, "We are on the path to victory and we will not stop until we achieve victory. We will not compromise and we will not stop," end quote. So again, I mentioned in this article the crucial context that Netanyahu's political career is in peril. And while the polling shows that Israelis support what he's doing in Gaza, it also shows that the majority of Israelis want him to step down when it's over. So there you go. There's the incentive for him to keep this going for as long as possible. So again, the death toll, according to Gaza's health ministry, is nearly 24,000 Palestinians. That's mostly women and children. I believe the number of dead children now is around 10,000, which is just horrific. There's also probably thousands under the rubble. And the starvation and disease, people could start dying in mass of that at any time as this thing continues. So the next one here, the UN says that providing aid in Gaza is almost impossible as famine nears. And this one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. And one thing, so we hit the 100-day marker. So it's been 100 days since Israel has unleashed this campaign in Gaza. So the UN's top humanitarian coordination official said that the crisis in Gaza is nearing famine as Israel further restricts aid to Gaza. In just over 3 months, millions have been displaced, hundreds of thousands are starving, and tens of thousands have been killed by the Israeli military. So this is Martin Griffiths, the UN relief chief. He said, quote, "Providing humanitarian assistance across Gaza is almost impossible. Our access to Khan Yunis and the middle area is largely absent," end quote. So he also said that all these delays and stuff, so it's really difficult for them to get in. And they say that Israel is adding restrictions on aid deliveries, on inspections, on certain things that can't be let in. He said, quote, "A growing list of rejected items means we are unable to bring into Gaza supplies to rehabilitate life-sustaining infrastructure," end quote. So one thing that they have added to the banned items list is generators for hospitals. They're not letting them bring those in, and water treatment centers, generators for both of those places. And Kyle mentions that last week, Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, he described this as well, basically saying how Israel was putting these really tight restrictions on aid coming in, and that, if they find one item on a truck that's not allowed in, then that means the whole truck is not allowed to come in. All right. So the next one here, the U.S. deployed an Air Force team to Israel to assist with targets. These documents suggest, and this is a report from The Intercept. So they obtained some documents that say the U.S. Air Force issued deployment guidelines for officers, including intelligence engagement officers headed to Israel. So we knew that the U.S. has been providing Israel with intelligence help. They've been flying drones over Gaza, and they say that was to help with hostage location and things like that. So these documents that they obtained suggest that they're also helping with targeting intelligence, because there are intelligence engagement officers in Israel. And they spoke with Lawrence Klein, who served as an intelligence engagement officer in Iraq. And what he said was, quote, "They're probably targeting people, targeting officers. What I can see is we've got a lot of global assets in terms of satellites and the like, and the Israelis have a lot in terms of more localized radar coverage," end quote. So talking about the different types of intelligence that the U.S. could help Israel with. So the deployment guidelines were issued by the Pentagon's Air Force Component Command for the Middle East, Air Forces Central, on November 21st. And so this was in November. The intelligence sharing, we know that there's U.S. Special Operations Forces in Israel helping out. Who knows exactly how, but we knew this stuff was happening in October. And so November 21st, so that means that this thing was going on for a month and a half, and the U.S. kind of took another step to increase support. And so these types of intelligence officers coordinate intelligence between the U.S. and partner militaries, When deployed in Iraq, Klein recalled that he and other engagement officers comprised a small team who spent probably 3/4 of their time working with the Iraqis and the other quarter checking in with headquarters. And he described it as half liaison and half advising. So I think certainly questions need to be answered here. And a point that they make in this report is that there's no transparency when it comes to the U.S. support for Israel's campaign in Gaza compared to Ukraine. We get this detailed list of all the weapons that they're sending to Ukraine. They're probably still hiding. I'm sure that they're hiding other things from us. But when it comes to Israel, we have to rely on leaks to get an idea of what weapons they're sending. And then we don't know how far the intelligence sharing goes. When it comes to Ukraine, they were pretty matter-of-fact about the fact that they were giving Ukraine targeting intelligence, which is very provocative to Russia. But, U.S. officials were saying that pretty early on in Ukraine. But when it comes to this, very secretive. All right, so the next one here, the Houthis' weapons and offensive ability has not been significantly harmed by U.S. airstrikes. So U.S. officials have acknowledged to the New York Times that U.S. and British airstrikes launched across Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen did not significantly impact the Houthis' ability to launch attacks in the Red Sea. So the Pentagon said that the first wave of strikes that were launched early Friday morning, which I covered in the last show, targeted around 30 locations and destroyed 60 missile and drone sites. Early Saturday morning, the U.S. launched another strike on a radar facility that U.S. officials said was missed in the initial attack. So the U.S. bombed Yemen again early Saturday morning. So Lieutenant General Douglas Sims, he's the director of the U.S. military's Joint Staff. He claimed on Friday that the initial round of airstrikes were enough to stop the Houthis from launching a large drone and missile attack in the Red Sea, similar to the one that they launched early last week. If you remember, there's a big barrage of drones and missiles. But these U.S. officials speaking to the New York Times said that that was not the case. They said that these strikes only degraded about 20 to 30% of the Houthis' offensive capability, which seems pretty high to me that one round of airstrikes could wipe out that much. They might be exaggerating that a little bit. They said that much of the Houthi weapons are mounted on mobile platforms that can be easily moved and hidden, and that finding targets was more difficult than anticipated since the U.S. has not been collecting much intelligence on the Houthis in recent years. And the Houthis have downplayed the impact on the U.S. Downplayed the impact of the U.S. and British strikes. 5 of their fighters were killed, but only minimal damage was caused. That's what Houthi officials said. Yemen's Sabah news agency reported, so there's reports that there was more U.S. and British airstrikes in Yemen on Sunday, but U.S. officials later denied that, said that they did not launch any strikes in Yemen, nor did any of their allies. So we'll see if more comes out about that. But the Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah, an important point here is that there's no way that the U.S. was going to totally degrade the Houthis in one round of airstrikes. They endured a brutal bombing campaign launched by a U.S.-backed Saudi-led coalition from 2015 to 2022. And that coalition used American warplanes, American bombs, American intelligence, and it's a very brutal bombing campaign. And in that time, the Houthis only became more formidable of a fighting force, and they developed missiles and drones. They could begin to really hit targets deep inside Saudi Arabia, which eventually made the Saudis start negotiating. So, the Yemenis, the Houthis, have taken a very defiant tone in the face of the U.S. and British attack on Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen, which is where 70 to 80% of Yemen's population lives. I just saw earlier on Sunday, the U.S. Central Command said that the Houthis fired a missile towards one of their ships. The Houthis are vowing a big response. We haven't seen anything really significant yet, but this idea that they were going to back down and this wasn't just going to escalate the situation is just completely laughable to anybody who knows anything about the Houthis or just kind of the situation in the region. And then the next one here, tanker companies halt Red Sea shipping after the U.S. bombs Yemen. So President Biden's decision to bomb Yemen has disrupted shipping in the region as several major tanker companies halted transits through the Red Sea after the U.S. and British airstrikes against the Houthis. So while container shipping was disrupted by Houthi attacks on Israel-linked shipping, Red Sea oil and fuel tanker traffic had remained steady in December. It wasn't really affected. But now several major tanker companies, including Hafnia, Torm, and Stena Bulk, all halted Red Sea transits on Friday. And shipping data showed that many tankers in the area were turning around. The Combined Maritime Forces, which is a U.S.-led coalition in the region, had issued a warning that advised ships to avoid transiting the Bab el-Mandeb Strait for several days. Oil prices also spiked by about 4% on Friday following the U.S. and British strikes. And Biden said that he ordered these strikes to preserve the freedom of navigation in the region. But, what he did is just escalated tensions. The Houthis have made it very clear that the reason they're doing this is because of what's happening in Gaza. And instead of pressuring Israel to stop that, this is what Biden has decided to do. And he's come under a lot of criticism from members of Congress who are calling the strikes unconstitutional. So hopefully, we see more of that. But again, so other context, just the fact that the U.S. is saying they're trying to preserve the freedom of navigation when they've been helping impose a blockade on Yemen since 2015. It's been eased since 2022, since the ceasefire was reached in 2022, but it hasn't been fully lifted. So just got to keep that in mind. And another point about the Houthis, so Kyle Anzalone wrote up over the weekend the second U.S. airstrike, and he included some important context that I usually like to mention about the Houthis. Just the fact that the U.S. cooperated with the Houthis in 2015 against al-Qaeda just a few months before they backed the Saudis against the Houthis. And, it's really something. I believe there was a report in the Wall Street Journal in January 2015 that said the U.S. began intelligence sharing with the Houthis in a new strategy against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Just a few months later, they turn around and back this coalition against them. And the Saudis and the UAE, weapons that the U.S. sold to them ended up in the hands of al-Qaeda in Yemen. Al-Qaeda fighters were fighting for militias backed by the UAE against the Houthis. So, the U.S. is really on al-Qaeda's side against the Houthis. All right, so the next one here. So talking about the war in Yemen, the U.S. airstrikes certainly risk escalating. Well, they risk breaking the truce between the Saudis and the Houthis. But something really almost astonishing to me happened just because of the war in Yemen was something I followed so closely for a long time. Saudi Arabia is calling for the U.S. to avoid escalation in Yemen. I mean, that's really, if you just, again, just from following the war in Yemen, the brutality of the Saudi war against the Houthis, the fact that the Saudis are calling the U.S. to show restraint. I mean, it just shows how far Biden is going here and how insane this all is. Saudi Arabia is asking the White House to show restraint in Yemen and avoid further escalating fighting with the Houthis. Riyadh is one of Washington's closest partners in the Middle East and has been at war with the Houthis for 9 years, but is nearing an agreement to end the war with Sana'a. So I say the truce was reached in 2022, and that means there's been no Saudi airstrikes in Yemen and no Houthi attacks in Saudi Arabia, but there has been fighting on the ground. The war is not totally over. And this article is by Kyle Anzalone. Anyway, I just thought it's just really something here. He kind of just goes over the background of the strikes in the rest of this article, but just the fact that the Saudis, the guy who's nicknamed Bonesaw, is urging restraint. And it definitely is a calculated strategy. The Saudis have decided to open up with Iran and ease tensions with, they're taking a more diplomatic approach, open up with Syria than what they did for the years before. But, just a few years ago, they were begging the U.S. for more help bombing Yemen. All right, so the next one here, federal employees to stage a walkout over Gaza. So federal employees from nearly 24 U.S. government agencies will walk off their jobs on Tuesday in protest of President Biden's full-throated support for Israel's brutal assault on Gaza. And this was reported by Al Monitor. So the Biden administration has faced significant internal dissent over the Israeli slaughter in Gaza. And officials from across government agencies have signed on to letters protesting the U.S. support for Israel, but a walkout would be kind of the most dramatic step, besides the two officials who resigned from the Biden administration. So dozens of U.S. officials are organizing the walkout as a group, calling themselves Feds United for Peace, which kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but that's what they're calling themselves, Feds United for Peace. They expect hundreds of other federal employees to join them on Tuesday. Al Monitor obtained a list of some of the agencies where employees are expected to participate in the protest, which includes the Executive Office of the President, the National Security Agency, the Department of State, Defense, Homeland Security, Veterans Affairs, and many more agencies. In light of this Al Monitor report, House Republicans are calling for any employee who participates in the protest to be fired. And that's something that Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, said. He said, quote, any government worker who walks off the job to protest U.S. support for our ally Israel is ignoring their responsibility and abusing the trust of the taxpayers. They deserve to be fired, end quote. So this sounds like it could be pretty significant. And it does go to show that this dissent, the opposition to this support for Israel, is not going away. It's not insignificant. It's something hopefully we could build on. And I know over the weekend on Saturday, there was a huge protest, calling for a ceasefire in Washington, D.C. And there's big ones in London again. So, there's definitely a lot of pressure on Biden from within the administration and the Democratic Party. All right, so the next one here is sad news. Gonzalo Lira, an American citizen who was in prison in Ukraine, has died. So Gonzalo Lira, an American citizen who was jailed in Ukraine for his political views, has died in Ukrainian prison, and this was confirmed by the State Department on Saturday. Lira died on January 11th after a battle with pneumonia that he said was initially ignored by Ukrainian authorities. Lira's father, Gonzalo Lira Sr., first notified the media of his son's death on Friday and said that he had been pleading with the U.S. Embassy to intervene. So this is Lira Sr. in an email to the Gray Zone. He said, quote, I cannot accept the way my son has died. He was tortured, extorted, incommunicado for 8 months and 11 days, and the U.S. Embassy did nothing to help my son, end quote. So the Gray Zone obtained a note that Lira Jr., so this is Gonzalo, that he recently wrote to his defense attorney that indicated he had pneumonia for months before being admitted into the hospital. He said, quote, I have had double pneumonia in both lungs as well as pneumonia thorax and a very severe case of edema, which is swelling of the body. All this started in mid-October but was ignored by the prison. They only admitted I had pneumonia at a December 22nd hearing. I'm about to have a procedure to reduce the edema. I don't know if it's edema or edema pressure in my lungs, which is causing me extreme shortness of breath to the point of passing out after minimal activity or even just talking for 2 minutes, end quote. So Lira was a popular YouTuber and political commentator based in the northeastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, and he gained prominence in the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I don't know if any of you might remember, there was videos of him just kind of walking around the streets in Ukraine, just kind of talking about the war, about Zelensky, and it got a lot of people's attention. It was very interesting seeing this American guy, because he's Chilean as well. He's American Chilean, but he was born in America, had an American accent, and that kind of got him popular when it came to commenting on the war in Ukraine. And so he was arrested by the Ukrainian Security Services, the SBU, in May 2023 for allegedly justifying the Russian invasion. So he was arrested for his speech, basically, for his political views. And the SBU also accused him of discrediting top Ukrainian officials. And these are the kind of laws that they passed to crack down on dissent. And this is a government, military, intelligence service completely propped up by the United States. And the Biden administration did nothing for him. You got to figure they could have just said, send him home, send him to the U.S. considering how much money they're giving Ukraine, I mean, it's impossible for me to believe that they couldn't have done that or couldn't have tried to do anything, said something publicly whenever they were asked about him. They just kind of didn't really say anything. They said they didn't want to comment. And you just see how they treated him compared to how they treat the Americans that get arrested in Russia. And there was a moment, so he was arrested in May 2023. In July 2023, he appeared on the internet again. He was released on bail, and he put out a video and some posts on social media basically saying that he thought he was kind of giving a wink nudge to flee. He was going to have a court date, and he thought he was going to get prosecuted. So he tried to get political asylum in Hungary, but on the way, he was detained again by Ukrainian forces and sent back to jail. And now he's dead. So it's something you just very little coverage. I mean, I don't think, besides, I was looking around today, there was an article in Newsweek about it, but very, more critical of Lira than of the Ukrainian government. I mean, it's pathetic, the media coverage on this. All right, so the last one here. So another big piece of news, but anyway, I kind of abruptly ended that. It's just very sad to know that he's dead. I didn't know him at all, but I knew some people that did. Again, it's just the lack of care of, just showing that they just did not care about him, probably because of his political views, is just really astonishing. All right, so the last one here, another piece of big news from the weekend was the elections in Taiwan. The ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is considered the more independence-leaning party, and less friendly to Beijing, they've been in power for the past 8 years. They won, and the candidate was William Lai, who is Lai Ching-te. Lai is the current vice president, and he won. The DPP did lose the legislature, so it could be harder for them to pass laws and stuff. But it does kind of indicate that this is going to be sort of more of the same. You're going to have a government that wants closer ties with the U.S., that wants more support from the U.S., and isn't going to kind of try to ease tensions with China. If the Kuomintang came in, I should have pulled up like the actual results here. I'll see if I could get them quick, but because it was like 40% for the DPP, I believe the Kuomintang was about 30%. And here we go. So William Lai got 40%. Hu Yue, the Kuomintang candidate, got 33%, and the TPP, the Taiwan's People's Party, which is a relatively new party, they got 26%. So the DPP won by a pretty big margin here, but the Kuomintang did better than the TPP, because for a while it looked like the TPP would do better than the Kuomintang. But anyway, so the story today is basically kind of just about the back and forth. So the U.S., so Blinken congratulated Lai, and so did many other Western countries. So China is warning against outside interference, saying that they're sending a negative signal and promoting Taiwanese independence forces. And the U.S. is sending, a quote-unquote unofficial delegation to Taiwan of former senior officials. They did this in 2008 and 2000. They sent these delegations of former senior officials, and you say, like, the U.S. officials get asked about this delegation, and they say, oh, these are private citizens acting on their own behalf here. They don't have anything to do with us, but that's just not true at all. So we'll see how things go. It does seem like the U.S. and China did kind of cool things off a bit just when it comes to the talks. It did, they held the military talks, but Taiwan, as this Chinese official says in this story, the Taiwan question is their the most sensitive issue when it comes to the U.S. and China. And the U.S. doesn't look like it's going to back off. If anything, they're going to keep ramping up this support for Taiwan and military aid and everything like that. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from David Stockman, To Hell with Fighting the Houthis. I really like that title. One from William J. Astore, Peace Hero Martin Luther King Jr. That's right, it's MLK Day, so he has a good story there about his anti-war stance, his speech against the Vietnam War. One from Ted Snyder, Wall Street Journal sets standard for irresponsible journalism in Ukraine. One from James Carden, neocons blame America first. And one from Gideon Levy, if it isn't a genocide in Gaza, then what is it? And you could scroll down. There's so much stuff at the lower half of the page. We have a Gaza section just about stuff that's happening on the ground, just the situation for the people. It's just horrific, horrific stuff. So you could go poke around down there. There's a lot of stories, other areas of the world too. Go check out our blog. Always lots of content on antiwar.com, even if you listen to this show. So that's it for me. I hope everybody had a good weekend. I'm going to be back tomorrow. Business as usual for the next few weeks. I can't think of any time that I'm taking off anytime soon. But you could always support us by sharing this show, telling your friends about antiwar.com. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.